September 13th, 1995. This is an interview with Nick Bonanno in Atlanta, Georgia, by Chris Lutz. Mr. Bonanno, can you tell us when and where you were born?
New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Manhattan, actually. August 3rd, 1927.
1927, same year as my dad.
68, this past August.
Okay, congrats. Happy birthday a little late.
Yeah.
What part of Manhattan?
Actually, I grew up in a village, what is now called Greenwich Village, or the Lower West Side. Thompson and Prince, Bleecker, and Carmine Street. Grammar School, St. Anthony's on Sullivan Street. And by the way, it's our famous artist does Fasanella, does these things. That's his neighborhood. As a matter of fact, some of the stuff hanging on the wall, you can see the street names that I mentioned. And
you went to St. Anthony's.
high school, LaSalle Academy, 2nd Street and 2nd Avenue. We were called the Bowery Boys. That's in the area that used to be called the Bowery. And then from there, 2 years at New York University, School of Commerce. And that's as far as I got in school.
Well, you went to a union school, though.
Oh, later on. Much, 4 years. 4 years after NYU, I spent those 4 years in the garment trade as a sewing machine operator. Okay. Making first ladies' jackets, what they used to call reefers. But not the kind of reefers you think of today. You know, you didn't smoke them, you wore them. And then making ladies' dresses, fairly high-priced dresses for that time. This was back in the middle 40s, the late 40s. And then the school you mentioned, in 1950, May 1st, 1950, David Dubinsky saw the diminution of leadership coming out of various portions of our society. And so he set up a school, which he called an institute. And people called it Dubinsky's Institute, Dubinsky's Academy, and stuff like that. And I was a member of its first class. And I applied, was accepted, and spent a year, 6 months in school, listening to lectures and history of the Union, so on. People like Eleanor Roosevelt came to speak to us. It made quite a stir. It was a novel idea, and it worked because many of the graduates became vice presidents. As a matter of fact, the president of the Union today, of Unite, is a graduate of that training institute. And many ILG vice presidents were graduates of that institute. So it was an idea that worked, and it was one of Dubinsky's other great ideas.
Was Dubinsky a man you admired?
Yeah, very much so. He was very tough. I was able to work with him quite closely on various strikes in the South, because after the school they sent me to the South.
Was that 1950, 51?
51. My first trip was in the end of the year 1950. The school year was from May to April, and the way it was structured, we went to school for 3 months, and then out in the field for 3 months, and then back in school, and then back. And my 2 trips, one was up to Chicago. It was very interesting. I had never been to the Midwest. Matter of fact, I hardly ever left New York State. I'd gone over to Jersey,
It's kind of like going out of the
Yeah.
country, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Going across the Hudson was like leaving town. And but I went up to Chicago and spent a good deal of time, 3 months, in the Midwest. As a matter of fact, it was very interesting times because Scott Lucas was the whip of the Senate, Democratic whip of the Senate, and a guy by the name of Dirksen beat him. And Everett Dirksen became a Republican leader of the Senate. And it was interesting to be up there. The politics in Chicago, the daily machine, and so on and so forth. But I also spent 3 months in the South, which was, I don't want to call it culture shock, but it was a different experience from downtown Manhattan.
What first struck you about the South?
Well, I like the people, and of course, I try to understand the customs, but my first assignment, the regional office was not Atlanta then, and Atlanta was a small city. I don't want to call it a town, but our regional office was in Chattanooga. And Chattanooga was, well, you know, Chattanooga is still Chattanooga. But from there they sent me, I came to Atlanta, I visited Atlanta, I worked in Atlanta, but then they sent me into the exterior areas, sort of. And one of my first assignments was in Mississippi. I didn't understand the people, and they didn't understand me. I still have a Yankee accent, I guess, but you should have heard it then. And when some young lady said to me, well, I was trying to get her to join the union, visit a house visit, and she said, I'm a bait of public life. I said, I didn't know what she said. But public life was working in a factory, and a bait meant she had it. She didn't want it anymore. And therefore she didn't have to join the union. But I guarantee you she didn't leave the shop. She was just wanting to get rid of me.
Strange. Well,
I spent about 6 months after that back in Mississippi. But I went back to New York to graduate. And frankly, when I heard that I was coming south permanently, because they had requested I come back, I quit.
Really?
Yeah. And this put the whole program into a tizzy, not because I was so good at it, but I was supposed to be the student response, and the programs had been printed with my name in it. I had been elected by the class to make the response to the students. As a matter of fact, I have the recording somewhere in the house of that
speech.
Yeah. And they also elected a committee to write the speech, which I wouldn't give the way they wrote it. I mean, it was really not. I was not called for, but it was a rabble-rousing kind of thing. And I didn't mind rabble-rousing a little bit, but
Did you see yourself as more low-key?
yeah, right. And of course, I don't know whether they elected me to make the speech so that they could use me. They didn't want to take the brickbats that would come.
That's right.
But I told them they could. I didn't want to come south. I had no reason to want to come south. My family was all up north, and I didn't mind leaving New York City, but we had a whole area, Pennsylvania and New England, and I really wanted to go there. And I had other arrangements in the city that I didn't want to completely cut off, you understand? I was a young boy, 23, 22, something like that. I just had reservations about being forced into something like that. And when I asked why you're sending me in the South, they said, well, you got a car, you own your own car. You see, what I didn't tell you was that I worked in a garment factory, but I was making a lot of money. I was making the last paycheck out of the garment factory. I worked for an outfit called Matthews and Kadetsky, 557th Ave. And the last paycheck out of that factory was $175 a week.
Which is
Now
good.
we're talking about 1950. Taxes were low. I lived at home. I had no family, and I could afford a car every year. I traded in a Chevrolet, $600 or something like that. I could get a new car, and I did have my own car. But when they told me that I would have to leave the city and leave the job, which was okay with me, I left it because in school we got no pay. We got nothing. We got $40 a week on the road. And out of that we had to pay our hotel or motel or rooming, whatever arrangements we made. And then when we graduated, we'd get the munificent sum of $60 a week. Plus expenses. And expenses on the road was $7.50. And out of that $7.50 you paid your motel. I mean, it's just...
Hey, it sounds like Georgia State today. Listen.
What? It's like
Georgia State today. That's not real high.
No, it was kind of low. And so I said, to hell with that. I'll go back to my job where I'm very comfortable, and I'll do, you know. I got a call from my father that day when I announced to the powers that be there at the school that I was going back to work in the shop. And my father called me. My father was a business agent for Local 89. It was Italian-American, Italian dressmakers local, very large local, important local to the union. And he called me. He said, "What did you do, Nick?" I said, "What do you mean, what did I do?" He said, "Well, Dubinsky called me, Hannah Haskell, who was Dubinsky's secretary. She called me, and I've got an appointment up there at 3 o'clock. I said, "Well, maybe it's about you." Well, he said, "You must have done something. What's the meaning? I don't know what..." I said, "Oh, I told him I'm going back to the shop." He said, "After spending a year?" Yeah. I said, "Yeah." Well, I told him how unfair it was, because as a New York guy, I was supposed to go close in one trip and far away another trip. And I took 2 far trips, and it shouldn't have made a difference, and all kinds of stuff. He says, "Well, don't do anything until I see Dubinsky." And I told him, I said, "You know, they're going to send me out there. I can't get home but twice a year or some such thing. And I just go back to work and work something else out." So he went to his appointment with Dubinsky, and he came up stairs to where the school was at, 1710. And Dubinsky was on the 4th floor. We were up on the 6th floor. He said, "It's all settled, Nick." I said, "What do you mean it's settled? Nobody's talked to me." He said, "No." He says, "That's all right. Dubinsky and I negotiated." He said, he started at 2 trips a year. I said 6. We settled on 4. You get 4 trips a year back to New York. And then he said, well, Dubinsky told him, "Look, a year or 2 seasoning there, and then we'll bring him back to New York. Or bring him back, you know, closer to New York." So that satisfied Pop, and I don't know if it satisfied me, but I said, "Okay, I'll give it a try." So I got in my car, and I came south, and that's 45 years ago. A couple of years after coming down, I had an opportunity to go back, and I turned it down. And I got used to the area. I got used to the people and the customs. And I could see the potential and the possibilities. And by the time I was 27, I was an assistant director here.
One of the youngest ever, weren't you?
Yeah, right, one of the youngest. And then I had my differences with directors. One of the directors was Al Carey. I was his assistant for 10 years, and we had and I won't go into it, but we had our differences, and he left. And when he left, I was the assistant, but they brought in another director because of the things that Al and I had. And the other director, well, as history will record, was not ready to be a director. And so I helped him for a year and a half, and then he told me I couldn't work with him anymore. And so I went to work for the president of the union, a fellow by the name of Lou Stolberg, who had taken Levinsky's place. In the meantime, Levinsky had retired. And I worked actually for about 3.5 years. My office was in New York, my family was in Atlanta, and I traveled the rest of the country. I was associate director of a department called Central Organizing. And
did that mean that you were in charge of the organizers?
I was associate director. There was a director, but we reported directly to Stolberg. We reported directly to the president. And anywhere we went, we had his imperature on organizing. I mean, you know, we could. I did that for about 3.5 years, and then I was called in and sent, asked to go to Baltimore to help a vice president who was ill, Angela Bombacci. And I thought I was going to move there because I became associate director there of the region. And when I got there, she went into the hospital and came back out. What amounted to a love fest. I mean, she was a great gal, great organizer, wonderful woman. But she was up in years, you know, in her 70s. And she treated me like the son she had, you know, and we got along real well. But I was there maybe 6 months, and then I was called in by the president, Stolberg. I'm told to come to Atlanta and take this office over because the director had signed and the assistant director signed, and that's how I became October of 1969. So that's how many years ago? 25?
Yeah, something 26. Like that, yeah.
26. And so, and I've been director here ever since.
Okay, now wait a minute, because I want to go back. You're not going to get off this easy on your youth. We're going to go back to your youth now. Tell me about, let's go back all the way back to your childhood and work our way up again. Tell me about what growing up in your neighborhood was like. Tell me about your mom and dad, too.
My mother we were very poor people. The first apartment, and I wouldn't call it an apartment, it was a flat. First apartment was at 120 Thompson Street. It's still there, the building is still there. It was a 5-story walk-up. We lived on the top floor. In the wintertime, we didn't need an ice box. We didn't have a refrigerator. We had an ice box. And my mother would make Jell-O in the living room and keep the milk there because it was cold enough there. In the summer, we put ice in the ice box when we could afford it. There was no hot water. And the heat that we had, I remember as a very young child, detesting what's now called progress. Because we went from a little coal stove, pot-bellied coal stove, and in the winter I would sleep in front of it in the kitchen. I had a folding bed that opened up, and I'd sleep in front of the pot-bellied coal stove. And it would stay nice and warm for hours, and I could go to sleep before it got cold. But progress said that kerosene was better. Kerosene stove was cleaner, didn't make as much soot, all that kind of stuff. The only trouble with the kerosene stove was that it got cold fast, and I'd go to sleep freezing then in the wintertime. We were on the top floor. When it snowed, it was like an ice box. I still remember that. We then, when I was about 12, moved to Carmine Street. My father's situation improved. My mother was a doll. She belonged to the Doll Toy and Novelty Workers Union. My father was that union's original recording secretary. And the only reason, I mean, one of the reasons why he became secretary, he was active, he was an activist in organizing. It was called Horseman Doll. Was because he could read and write a little bit of English. And so the letters that they wrote back and forth to the Bell, joining, getting themselves organized, he would read them and write them. And then his factory went out of business, or it moved to avoid union or whatever. And that's when he got into the dress industry in New York, which was quite big and still is. And things were tough. Things were very bad. We were poor as churchmen. I remember what we called then was, today they call it aid or whatever, but in those days they called it home relief. Today they call it welfare. But we were on home relief, and I don't mind telling anybody that it was not one of the nicest things to have to go stand in line someplace for medical treatment or for stamps or whatever. And we were poor. We were poor as church was. Things began to improve, and for my dad, he became a dress presser, and that means pressing the dresses. It was hard work, 16-pound iron, and not too bad in the wintertime when it was cold, but it was in the summer when you're pressing those things. And he began to make decent living. My mother was stayed in the doll business. She was a dresser. She dressed dolls. Now, that may sound like play when you dress one doll, but when you got to dress a gross of dolls, 144 dolls, in a day, and the pins in your hands and so on. But that's how they made their living, and that's how they supported me.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I had no brothers and sisters. I had a sister, but she died in the hospital at birth. And so they really were hard-working people. And as things improved, then we moved, when I was about 12, to Carmine Street. This was a great big, it had a shower, hot water, steam heat, and a bell downstairs. It was a remodeled building right across from Our Lady of Pompeii Church. Some people might know where that is in the village. And that was really going uptown. And as a matter of fact, they could afford to send me to LaSalle Academy, which was a Christian Brothers school on 2nd Street and 2nd Avenue, as I've mentioned. And there was a tuition there. It was $10 a month. That was expensive. But things improved for the family, and Dad became president, and he became an officer of the union. Not that there was a lot of money in it, but it was a steady salary. It was a steady pay. The paycheck came in every week. There was no layoffs. And Mom, of course, worked. And then I worked, too, in various jobs.
What was your first one?
First job, moving tomato cans and olive oil cans off the sidewalk in front of a grocery store for a nickel a night, if that's what you call a job. First job was really at a place called J.H. Tailoring Company, and I worked there after school, summer, and I was making 70 cents an hour, I think, something like that, which was quite a bit. But I quit there to go to work for the city doing surveys on the street. And I figured out the 2 weeks that I worked for them, I made as much money as I worked for the whole summer for this tailoring company. And so I quit there and took this other job. But then I worked down on Wall Street, collating. No glamorous job, but as a collator. In those days, no computers or anything. They would put out the latest quotes on these stocks and bonds. As a matter of fact, the company's name was National Quotation Bureau. I don't know if they're still around, but they would print up the sheets, and you would get them, put them in boxes with a rubber finger, collate them, and put them together. So I did that, and a few other odds and ends jobs. But I went to school, basically, and after school, after NYU, I went into the garment industry. And so the first week, it was summertime, when school was over with, and I passed by a factory. I had gone up, I'd been a counselor at a camp, too, for the Children's Aid Society. I did a couple of summers with them. And believe it or not, you got $60 for the season. Room and board. $1 a day is what it was. But it was the work. It was interesting, and I was involved with the Children's Aid Society at Sullivan Street. And but I actually that wasn't a job, but I went up for another outfit, and my buddy got fired. That came up with me. And when he got fired, I quit with him. I thought it was unjust. Maybe it was right. I don't know. But I came back to the city that summer and went and saw a sign on 8th Street, Broadway. It said, "Operator wanted, no experience necessary." I went up. I met this guy, Louis, and he hired me. The first week I got no pay at all, nothing. Just taught me how to thread the machine and run it, and then gave me some pieces to sew, and then gave me some actual work. The second week he gave me $5 for the week, $5. And with it I bought him a scissor, a whisk scissor. And the third week I went, and he said to me, "Nick, I'm going to double your pay, you better double your production." I said, "Wait a minute, Louis." I counted the tickets, when you do work, and I cut tickets, and each ticket had a value. I said, "You gave me $5, I did $22 worth of work. You mean if I do $44, you're going to give me 10? I said, "That's not fair, Louis." "Well," he said, "Nick, I'm teaching you." I said, "I know, goodbye, Louis." And I left. And I guess that's what, eventually I got a job about a week later in Houston and Broadway, in this reefer shop. Reefer is a little jacket. And do they still call them, the ladies still call them reefers?
No, there's that other association.
Yeah, another association. And it was what was called a section workshop. And you made pieces, and then it got put together. And I worked on collars, cuffs, this and that. I got $25 a week. Time work, no piecework. Eventually, after a month or so, I got about $30 a week. Economics was waning, and I was about ready, school was about ready to go back into session. My father said, "Why aren't you going back to NYU, I said, "No, look," I was 18, by the way. I just turned 19. I was going to turn 19 in August. And maybe it was, and you got to understand that it was the war year, the wars were over. I did not go. I was not drafted. Because I went to, in September, the war was over in August. And I had flat feet. And they said no, they didn't want it. And then I was going to college, and so they figured if they take me and they use me for a year, they'd have to pay for my tuition. So they said, no, we don't need you. And they were discharging all the boys and coming back out. In a way, I wanted to go. I wanted to volunteer when I was 17. My father said, no, wait until you've gone to school, and then you'll go, and they take you. And then it turned out they didn't take me. It was disappointing. I really wanted the experience of going overseas, I guess. You know, everybody was jazzed up. But it didn't work out that way. And so I went to work in this place and stayed there for about 6 months. And I got laid off. Seasonal layoffs. Garment industry. There's always seasonal layoffs.
What's the season that you get laid off?
Well, you do, in the winter you're doing summer and spring and summer work. Okay? And in the fall you're doing summer and spring and summer stuff. I mean, you're ahead of yourself for season. So that in the summer you're working on the heavy wools if you're in jackets and coats, and in the winter you're working on the lighter stuff. So there was always seasonal layoffs there. And some type garments there was more than just 2 seasons. You might have to be laid off for 3 seasons. And that's why the reference I made about the paycheck kept coming in, even if it was small. It was a steady paycheck for 52 weeks. In the garment industry, the layoff is a problem. And it still is. Well, now the problem is getting work altogether. But I stayed there, and I worked with my dad, who worked uptown, 40, in the dress industry. Said to me, and by the way, interestingly enough, it was a union shop I worked in, but I couldn't join the union.
Okay.
They said the books were closed. And I kept bugging the business agent. It was Paul DeVico, and it was Local 48, ILGW shop. And the books are closed, And, it's such a different atmosphere that I came to work in, where people wouldn't join the union. Here I was trying to knock the doors down to get my books, because once you got the book, then you got certain benefits and protections. Yeah. Well, I still hadn't been able to get in, and I was stalled and delayed. Well, you got to learn, you got to do. And so Pop said, well, look, you're laid off. Aren't you going back to school? I said, no, not. Give me a year or so. And he said, all right, come on uptown and we'll work something out in the dresses. Well, by that time I knew how to run a sewing machine, but I did not know how to make a dress. And the dresses I worked on were higher priced, and they were not piecework. They were whole garment production. That's different than piecework. You made the whole garment. You put it all together.
Is that more of a skill?
Well, it took more skill, yeah, because instead of just doing the one operation, you did many operations. Like, for instance, before it was over with, I could make a buttonhole, a handmade buttonhole. And, now, when I say you did the whole garment, you didn't hem it. We had finishes, hand finishes to hem it, and press it. Of course, we had presses. So that, but you did the body of the garment completely, practically. And so it took me, at first I went to work in this shop, a decent employer, and I was something like $30 a week was where I had left the other place. It was time work. And I was apprenticed to a man who had a gift in his hand of speed. He could, you looked at him, you thought he was sleeping, but his hands were going a mile a minute. And he would make $350, $400 a week. And that was a lot of money in those days. This is the middle 40s, late 40s. But I remember getting this $35, and I would do other things in the factory. I'd go on a cutting table and help them put the chalk on so the cutters could see, and I did other odds and ends. But I was learning how to sew dresses. These were high-priced dresses, and I got my union book. March of years, and I got laid off because of seasonal stuff. And when we went back to work, the boss said to me, "Well, Nick, you're doing fine. I'll give you $60 a week, but I want you to work in the cutting room." So I said, "No, I got my book now, Mr. Matthews, and I want my share of the work." And I had a right to ask for it. But I was a young punk kid. I mean, but I asked for it. The business agent came up. I said, "Look, they were afraid I was going to ruin the garments and this and that." And I said, "If I ruin it, I'll pay for it." Fair enough? Fair enough. So I started to work, and the first week, I didn't make no $60. I made $35. But before that season was over, I was up at 75. And the next season, I started at 75 and got to 90, $100 a week. And then the next season,
so you were doing very nicely.
Yeah, I was progressing, and I decided that was the right thing that I did. I mean, I made the right choice. As I say, the last paycheck was clean $175. But it still wasn't satisfying. There was still something I was looking for, and I guess this is what.
This is what it was. Did you want a challenge, maybe?
Oh, yeah, you're 20. I was 19, 20 years old. I was involved in politics. We had a political party. It was called the American Labor Party, and then it became the Liberal Party in New York State. And we never won anything, but we helped get people elected. But we backed people like Roosevelt, Truman, and so on. I remember being in the shop working when Truman was elected, because it was till noon the next day, until the last votes were counted. But yeah, I guess it was a challenge. I guess it was something more meaningful and something besides making dresses and money, because there was money to be made in the industry in those days.
Tell me what got you involved in the Labor Party.
Well, the ILG and Dubinsky and Hillman, were very politically active, especially, interestingly enough, they caused us a hell of a lot of trouble. Our political activity manifested itself in the Truman presidency because Roosevelt wanted to pick Jimmy Burns from South Carolina as his vice president. But the labor people, especially Dubinsky and Hillman of the amalgamated, Sidney Hillman, opposed Burns because he was a Southerner, an anti-union.
And a buffoon.
Yeah. And as a result, Harry Truman became president in 1944. When Roosevelt died, he became president. And Burns never forgave the unions, especially the amalgamated and the ILG. He went back to South Carolina, became governor, and passed the right to work law, and set up what is now called SLED, the State Law Enforcement Division. And I know because they came after me physically. I had 4 years in the Carolinas organizing. And they were out after that little black-headed Dago bastard number on me. I know it because I struck many a shop over there, organizing. And he never forgave us. He never forgave us. And I was, there was a hotel called Wade Hampton. I used to stay there. It was $3 a day. It had air conditioning. I was hanging out the window the day that Jimmy Burns introduced Eisenhower as a true son of the South. I almost choked to the people in South Carolina from the Capitol steps. It was hard to take, and he was a guy who had been given everything. Burns was Secretary of State, Chief Justice, the governor, everything. I mean, just the Democratic Party had given him everything but the presidency. And he turned against it that way. And that's why he turned against it, because he didn't get the final act was the presidency. And I just couldn't understand.
Vindictive man.
He was and I'll never forget, one day I was flying up to New York, and we were going, in those days it was prop planes, because I flew many in DC-3, but this was an Eastern flight, a two-engine, but it was a newer version. It was not a DC-3. And Burns was up first, what was first class in those days, and I was back in coach, and we were going through a storm. And I said, I'll never forget saying to myself, Jesus, I don't want to die with that son of a bitch. Of all the guys to have to go down with, I didn't want to go down with him. And it was a rough ride, but we got there okay.
Well, now, let's get up to about 1950, and you're coming south. Were you married then, Miss Howard?
No, I got married in '57.
Was your wife from New York?
Yeah, New Yorker.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you eventually have 4 kids, is it? 4,
yeah. We had four children. My first 3 are chosen children. We didn't conceive. I guess I was traveling too much. And we went to an agency here in town and took a little infant boy in Bonanno, and then another boy, and then another girl. And interestingly enough, after I became director down here, my wife got pregnant. And that was after 16, almost 17 years of marriage. And I guess you got to be a director to conceive. I mean, and it's not because I was home well. I just don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with stress and uncertainty. Until I became a director, my wife was very unsure of our financial situation or whatever. But anyway, we have 4 children.
Coincidentally, my 3 kids were adopted too.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that I don't.
I go with the stress theory too.
We didn't use the word adopted. We just said chosen.
Yeah.
And I mean, it doesn't make any difference. Our children know the circumstances, but it don't make any difference.
Right, your children are your children.
Yeah. Parenting is not birthing. Birthing is just an act of nature. Parenting is another kind of thing.
Parenting is being up at 2 o'clock in the morning, wondering where he is with your car.
Yeah, right. Well,
and then trying to stay calm when he gets in at 3.
I remember the first one, Nick, the oldest one. He's now 34, and he has 2 little girls. I'm a grandfather. I remember being up at 3 o'clock in the morning with Dr. Spock's book, trying to figure out what the hell is wrong with this kid. I know it's not pins stuck in his behind. But I felt like a toy or a piece of mechanical equipment that wouldn't work, and I'm reading the book. I said, what am I doing here? I thought he had colic. I thought it just was crying, that's all. I had to comfort him, and when we did, he stopped crying, and then when we put him in the crib, he started crying again. You know, but that's parenting, raising a child. Anyway.
So now, here. Okay, so you come south. Tell me about starting out to organize in the south.
The first campaigns were an experience because I didn't understand the people, actually the language, almost. But you get your message across. I think people understood when you were telling them that this was for their benefit and you had a mission and so on. I think that got across. But it took 2 years before I won the first election.
Where was that?
Over in South Carolina. And I had my best years organizing were in the Carolinas, or in South Carolina, and also North Carolina, because actually I was sent over there to direct the activities in the Carolinas, both Carolinas, which had a great deal of great potential. And when I got there, I had two locals, one in Hartsville, South Carolina, and one in Winnsboro, South Carolina. Nothing in North Carolina, none at all. And we had experience in Hartsville where I walked in, I was servicing, I was doing everything, organized servicing, and directing the activities of the other people working in the area. And I was just a young man, I mean, really young. But they said the local wanted to lynch me. I mean,
Well, all right, you left off with the business agent who.
hadn't represented correctly some portion of the contract, they said. And whether that was true or not, I don't know. So we got it straightened out, and eventually I struck that shop in Hartsville. It was Cotton City Manufacturing Company, for the first 35-hour agreement in the South. But it took a couple of years to bring it around.
Well, wait a minute, you got it straightened out while you were alive, so they didn't lynch you.
Oh, yeah.
How did you get it straightened out?
Well, we got the miscommunication corrected. It had to do with vacation pay or something. I don't think they understood that the company had to take out certain deductions or whatever. Okay. But we got it straightened out.
Just so they didn't get you out by the tree with the rope.
No, as a matter of fact, by that winter, we had a Christmas party, and I decided to. It was interestingly enough because one of the leaders against the union to tear me up had been a lady who couldn't read or write. And the business agent, it was a female, had made the mistake in a heated argument with this person at a union meeting, saying that she was stupid. Well, she didn't mean you can't read or write. I don't think she knew that. But later on, it was told to me privately that she couldn't read or write, and that she felt personally offended by it. And I don't think that the business agent meant it that way. You know, it was, as a matter of fact, this person was from Philadelphia. She was not a Southerner. I don't think she understood the delicacies. And one of the ways I got over that is that in one of the meetings, I asked her if she didn't want to be recording secretary. And she thought that that was very nice of me, but she didn't have the time. And so her feelings were assuaged, and she felt vindicated. Yeah. But that was going on. Then we had a shop in Walterboro, South Carolina, where we struck for 3 months. We won an NLRB election, struck, and I always tried to rent a facility. In this case, it was a house directly across from the plant. And when we struck it, we opened up a headquarters in this house, and we always had a kitchen. And Walterboro is down near Charleston. It's plantation country. And I was, I don't know, 25 or something like that. And I didn't know nothing from nothing. And my headquarters were always integrated, completely and absolutely. Whatever segregation took place was theirs, as far as the kitchen was concerned, as far as the headquarters was concerned, as far as the picket line was concerned. Now, there were certain picket groups that were, segregated, but not by me, not officially. They did it themselves because they were friends and they went to the churches and so on and so forth. But the headquarters were the kitchen, and the seating and the meetings were completely integrated. And they told me, you're crazy, you can't do that. And we did it, but we did it, and it worked, and we won the strike. We got a contract, and we had for 20-something years a shop there until imports knocked it out of business.
What was the name of the plant?
It was Walterboro Manufacturing
Okay.
when I was in there, with portrait frogs. When we were organizing, and then it went through a couple of changes. Eventually, a Country Miss owned the factory. But our industry, is being racked by imports, has been for 20 years. But it was an interesting thing because at the end, I wanted to hold a victory party. And unbeknownst to me, the Armory at that time, after we made all the arrangements, wouldn't take an integrated party. So we had our party at the headquarters. And it worked. The people got along famously. What they did after the picket line and what they did but in the factory, everything was... No, let me talk to you. The interesting part of this town was the mayor would send the police chief to the picket line. And we had a darn good picket line. Those girls, they'd make men look like second raters when it came to a picket line. A woman can have great picket lines. And but the mayor would send the police chief. And the first time, I didn't know what to expect. I said, well, let me go wash up. I was sweaty and so on. And I had no, he said, don't worry, just come with the clothes you got on. He just wants to talk to you. And it took about 10 minutes to get to the mayor's office from the picket line. And all the way over, the police chief said, you like the way you're living, you better, why don't you leave our woman alone? Why'd you come up here and stir this up? And you better make sure that you don't have any problems. And the best thing to do is to leave town. They'd get to the mayor's office, and this got to be not quite daily, but almost several times a week. I'd get in, the mayor would say, well, now, we want peace and quiet here. And, I said, so do I. We're just demonstrating. It's American rights to strike and jobs. And so, well, okay, but we just want peace and quiet. And then the police chief would take me back, all the way back, and say, if you like the way you're living, you better get out of town. And so that was their way of telling me to go. And it was, I was young, I could tell you. I'd be up night and day practically because it was 24-hour picket line. And the headquarters was open 24 hours a day. And in the evening it got interesting because the husbands would come around. And I'll never forget one morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, I get a phone call at the place I was staying, in the hotel there. And he said, are you there? I said, yeah. He said, well, you better come down to picket line. I said, why? He said, it's getting hot down here. I said, what's... Well, the rumor is that you've been arrested, and they were going to go break you out, you know. I was,
Oh, right.
and I said, well, all right. I just, her pants were standing up in a corner, and I jumped in them. I went down for an hour and said, no, that's, you know, it's just a rumor. I'm not. Eventually, they did come down with Jimmy Burns' sled people, and that's the sled making that noise. And they caught us between shifts in the afternoon, not in the morning. They caught us between shifts, and they came in with about 60 guys, sheriffs, policemen. And if you know anything about state law enforcement guys in South Carolina, they wear little guns on their hips, showing, in a holster. They're like Wild West. And one of the old-time organizers, the ILG, Mary Cameron, she was running the shift at the time, and they came in, swooped in, carried a girl across the line, supervisor, and there was a battle royal. And one of these sled guys, years later, admitted that he still had the teeth marks on his breast that one of the girls, they broke a girl's finger, but he had
It's been a difficult time explaining
a remembrance
it
of the Walter Burroughs strike he carried for the rest of his life. But it was rough, and we had about 11 girls in jail. We had to go get them out. I happened not to be on the picket line at the time. And it was, you know, what we considered a slow period, like 3 o'clock. And they knew that. They came busting in. But the girls did a good job. Eventually, we got a contract, and the place was a decent place. Even the newspaper guy, named Whitman Smoke, S-M-O-A-K, was anti-union. And I became a good friend of his. And I think we earned each other's respect. But then I found out that his wife was a social liberal. And she read liberal magazines, and she was on my side. I'd go visit them. If I came to town after that and didn't visit with them, they'd be highly insulted. And I'd go there for coffee and lunch or something, and she'd usually be arguing on my side of the fence, because he would back right to work, but he also understood that right to work was not fair. Because I said, how can it be fair? You have to represent people, and they don't contribute anything. You know, and they take all of the good for nothing. And this country wasn't built on something for nothing. This was built on contribution by everybody in society. And that's a small society in the planet. So we became respectable friends. I never convinced him, and he never convinced me, but
it's funny that his wife would...
He gave us a fair shot in the newspaper after that. The Walterboro News and Courier, something like that. Walterboro Standard, I think. Then his son took over. He passed away. I guess the mother's gone. But
what happened? Where did you go after Walterboro?
Andrews, South Carolina. That was an interesting. Oneida Knitting Mills. I organized that thing. We won the election there pretty big.
You organized Oneida?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Actually, we organized it before the Amalgamated got it.
Okay.
And I led the organizing and the strike there. We had long, Oneida ran away from Utica, New York. They were union up there, ILG up there. and we thought that maybe we could work something out in Andrews, and it didn't work out. So that it was quite a struggle. And the town of Andrews, a mayor by the name of Ragland, was anti-union. Well, we didn't know that, and we had the people. The people were, somehow the chemistry was great. I remember Hazel McLaughlin, Peggy Swales, his name is John Vincent Payne. It wasn't a man, it was a woman. Great organizers. I mean, they worked in the factory, but they were great organizers. We'd meet, I'll never forget, we met one time at one of these ladies' houses. It was Peggy's house, and the house wasn't big enough. We had 100 people at the meeting. And so we met in the front yard, and we'd use the porch as the podium kind of thing. And I had had a meeting at the Legion Hall or whatever it was, and the first meeting, and I spoke at the meeting, and we got ourselves organized, and the mayor came to the meeting, and I was told that he was, and he was an elder of the church, someone at a Baptist church or whatever, and I invited him to open the meeting with a prayer, which he did. And there were no restrictions; anybody could speak. We had a meeting. But after that, he was working against us. We knew it. So I had this meeting out in the open at one of the ladies' houses, and we had maybe 100 people in. I knew we had more people than the company had. The company had their meeting in the school hall in Andrews. So after we did our business rather quickly, I said, well, let's go and join our sisters and brothers in the school hall. And so we walked over to the school hall, and they had all the business people there and a smattering of workers. And we walked in. Well, the floor was wooden, and we did sound like a herd of cattle. But the mayor said, his first blast was, "You sound like a herd of cattle coming in here, breaking up our meeting." And that was his mistake, first mistake. And then he said, this meeting is for employees only. So one of my people said, well, what are all these businessmen doing here? And he says, I raised my hand, I wanted to speak. He says, you can't speak. You don't have the right, you're not an employee. Well, I had some girls that could do a hell of a lot better job than I could. And he turned me down. And so some of the other girls got up and made union speeches. You know, they'd heard me long enough. And I just sat back. Well, on the way out of the meeting hall, there was a long flight of stairs down from the meeting room. And some guy got over, some businessman got over anxious. And he was on my back to push me down. And fortunately, one of the husbands, Peggy's husband, I think it was, grabbed him off my back, and they were ready to beat his brains in. And frankly, I wouldn't have minded too much, but under the circumstances, I figured we're better. And I said, no, don't do that. That's probably what they're looking for. So we walked out of there peacefully. The next day, a committee of the workers went to the mayor's office and asked him, why didn't you spoke at our meeting. You had the right to speak at our meeting. Our meeting was open to everybody. he wouldn't let our representative speak. He says, oh, that bananas, cornstalk, whatever you call him, I had him checked out. He's a communist. No, you got to understand the period of time. We're talking about McCarthy.
Yeah.
And to call somebody a communist was a terrible thing. And they came back and told me the story. I said, by golly, we're going to get that son of a gun. I got myself a lawyer, and we sued him for defamation of character, $100,000. Well, that was like $1 million today, or maybe more. And he owned 2 furniture stores, one in Lake City and one in Andrews. Well, I had the factory. I had a big local in Lake City. So we decided we were going to boycott him in Lake City and sue him in Andrews. We won the election. We won the strike. We went back to work. We got a contract. And then we had a lawsuit. I remember the regional director was a guy by the name of Martin at that time. He was still in Chattanooga. And I had asked for the money for the lawsuit to put down, I forget what it was, $50 or something like that for the cost. And the regional director thought I was crazy. But he sent me the $50 of the protest, or $100, whatever it was. And I said, okay, all right, let me finish. And I said, well, we need this for organizational purposes. It's not really, I don't expect to get rich on it. And after it was all over with, all said and done, the case was coming up for trial in Charles. He got nervous, Raglan got nervous. He turned all of this wealth to his wife. Should have served him right. She should have forced the son of a bitch. And we made a settlement at the last hour, the day before the trial. He gave the lawyer's costs and an apology, public apology, writing, and so on. And I sent the $50 back to the regional office. And I understand the regional director, who was grumpy, he was getting old and ready to go, said, why did he have to send the money back? But it made the point.
Yeah.
It made the point. And we were never called communists again in Andrews. And then I don't know what happened. I told you I spent 4 years away from the region doing other things. And in that period of time, we lost that local. It was a shock for me. And eventually, the Amalgamated went in and organized them, and now it's an Amalgamated local. Good people, good union.
And now Amalgamated is the same as you.
Yeah, well,
all together anyhow.
Yeah, right. But it's still, I mean, we're merged, but we're not merged to that extent.
I've got to ask you about that to get that clear in my head, too.
Yeah, right.
Do you have to take a call?
My assistant wants to talk to me.
Oh, okay. We left off at Andrews, and you just talked about how the Andrews Union, after you had gone, stopped and then went over to active.
Yeah,
So we're in 1952, 53, around there?
54.
Okay. Well, what else were you up to in the early 50s?
And interestingly enough, we then had a strike in Andrews, and that showed the kind of involvement Dubinsky, although he was handling world affairs and, putting the AFL and CIO together and stuff like that. He'd also take a hand in things like a strike, and that's how I got to work with him. The Andrews strike was my strike. We had to call the shots, and I said to him, I called him up, I told him, I think we ought to make an unconditional offer to go back or something like that. The lawyers had advised that. And that meant that the back pay would start ticking for all our people, and it would be a burden on the company and maybe a pressure to come, we could always call it again, the strike. So he said, I'll bring the committee up to New York. So I brought the Andrews Committee up to New York. And we met in Dubinsky's office with the attorneys and went over the thing. And in a tearful session that lasted some 2 hours, it was decided that we should make this unconditional offer to go back as a strategic move. And after the meeting, Dubinsky called me back. He said, Bonanno, come here. Bonanno, come here. He said, let me tell you something. He said, you see, you're still in control of the situation. And you got to make your moves while you're still in control. Maybe 2 weeks, a month down the line, we wouldn't be in control. So he said, now's the time to make that maneuver. And I always admired him because he took his own good advice. When he retired, I think he retired just before he began to slip. He was in his early 70s, 72, something like that. I think he knew he was beginning to slip, and he took his own good advice. But he was quite a guy. The middle 50s, 1956, 57. I was an assistant director here. Well, it was 57, because I came back here in 56. By that time I was married. I got married January 56. And living in Atlanta. And I had, one of my duties was to put together the retirement, or help put together the retirement party or celebration for the first retirees of our national retirement fund. There's something like 12 people that retired. And this was 1957 Atlanta. I don't think people really recognize the problems that you had putting a thing like that together. You could not have an integrated function like that in a hotel. No hotel would take an integrated function. So I knew Stanford Mackover. I dealt with him. He had a factory. That was Shirley.
Where we are is we're in the 50s, and you get to be assistant director down here.
Yeah, okay.
Now let me ask you, are you still involved with the American Labor Party at this point?
No,
That's
that
gone,
was a
right?
New York thing.
Okay.
And then the American Labor Party got taken over by the extreme left, and it became the Liberal Party then. It was changed. So then the American Labor Party became a left-wing kind of deal in New York. And so we came out of that into the Liberal Party. But no, that was just the New York State Party. Here, down here, I'm always in the Democratic Party.
Are you a yellow dog Democrat?
No, well, yes, I guess, because I'd have to hold my nose sometimes to vote. Sometimes, you know,
Yeah, I
the
know.
choices was slim and none, and sometimes they still are. Excepting like here in the 5th District with John Lewis. But frankly,
Yeah.
it's tough sometimes to
I know.
vote for the people you gotta vote. Imagine voting for Herman Talmadge.
No, not in a million years.
No,
It's
I
painful,
was
boy.
I was instrumental in getting a rump. And by the way, the official movement. That's another part of the story. Before Herb Mabry, there was a guy by the name of Montague who was president of State Federation of Labor. And they supported the wool hats from South Georgia. And I'd go into these meetings, and I almost had fisticuffs with one of them. Because I said, how can you support a guy? Well, all of the courthouses are painted by union painters. I said, oh, what's that got to do with schools and roads and people and segregation and what have you? And so we had some times. even here, within the labor movement. I'm getting away from what I wanted to talk about.
Well, let's get back to what you want to talk about, and I'll get back to politics later.
Yeah.
You're just assistant director, as you can
Right,
later.
and we're setting this retirement party up here in 1957. 12 people. You couldn't, so I knew Stanford Mackover, who was one of the owners of Shirley Cloak and Suit. And at that time, he was president of a Jewish community club in town. There were several of them. The one that survives is called the Standard Club. That's now up in North Fulton area. And but at that time, he was president, chairman of the Progressive Club. The Progressive Club owned a facility that's now Turner's headquarters down near Georgia Tech. But that was the Progressive Club. And because I knew many of the fellows and dealt with them, that was the only place you could go in and get a drink on a Sunday and a meal. It also had slot machines. Yeah. And that was the best of times because the meals were very cheap when they had the slots. There were slots in Atlanta. Oh yeah, sure. The Eagles had slots right around the corner from the Ansley Hotel downtown. If you knew it, the bellhop would tell you to go around the corner. You know, slot machines up against all the wall. There were slot machines. But when the slots were chased out of Atlanta, the meals got to be more expensive at the Progressive Club. And public was not invited. It was a private club. But I knew people, and I could go by virtue of knowing some friends. But I convinced Stanford that we should have that function in his hall, in his dining room. They couldn't handle 500-600 people.
How did you convince him?
Well, he was kind of a very liberal kind of guy. He wasn't typical, redneck kind of. He was not at all. He was a liberal guy, and he took it on himself to give the approval, so that we had what amounted to a completely integrated function. Now, Dubinsky came, and Dubinsky would not come unless it was completely integrated. And he came. And I went to Mayor Hartsfield at the time with a committee and asked him to come. Now, he was facing re-election. And I said, look, I understand in 6 months or 9 months you're going to be on the ballot. And I want you to know that this function is going to be completely integrated. We've invited a cross-section of the community, religious leaders, political leaders, et cetera, et cetera. And our membership is open seating, open arrangements, cocktail party, open bar, and so on. And his answer was, I think, one of the reasons why Atlanta is Atlanta today. He said, I'll be there with bells on. He said, I will come. He says, some of these old cronies around here want me to close the golf courses. He said, what are we going to do, throw corn on them? He said, they're there to play golf. The citizens of Atlanta love golf. And I said, well, that's great. Mayor, we'll be glad to have you. He said, you telling me Dubinsky's going to be down? I said, yeah. He said, when is he coming? I said, well, he's coming on Tuesday, the day of the function. That afternoon, he'll be down. He said, you contact so-and-so, and I'll have 2 motorcycle cops at the airport to escort you into town. So sure enough, appointed hour came. He came in on Capital Airways, on a Viscount, not a jet. It was a prop jet, Viscount. And old Hartsfield, well, it wasn't Hartsfield Airport at the time. It was the Quonset hut. And I met the patrolmen, the motorcycle guys, and they took me inside the gate, right up to the plane. I parked my car. And Capitol people, I had warned them that this guy was our president was coming. And they took my ticket. They took his ticket, the bags, took it out of the cargo hold right there, put it in my car, and we, with two cops in front of us coming into town. And of course, there was no expressway like there is now. There was kind of a road that looked better than most, but it was two on one side, two on the other. And they got these motorcycle guys in front of them. The traffic was kind of heavy, and they're pushing people away, and I'm following behind them. Dubinsky's sitting in the front seat, smoking a big cigar. My wife was with me, and Leon Stein, the editor of Justice, had come with Dubinsky. And the first thing he wanted to know, who's that girl? Who's that lady? And I said, that's my wife. Oh, okay. And then he says, Bonanno, don't go so fast. Don't following behind these cops. I said, well, I got to follow them. They're cleaning the road out for us. We're going. He thinks a little bit. He says, a couple of years ago, those cops would have been behind us, not in front of us. And I said, well, yeah. Even today, if it wasn't for Mayor Hartsfield, they might be behind us. He came, and the function I considered was one of the most telling points of our experience down here, because it changed everything, I think, even with the members and the staff and whatnot. And Dubinsky had a thick Jewish accent. I mean, pretty thick. But it got thicker when he got emotional in the speeches. He was an emotional speaker. Powerful voice, little guy, 5'4". I don't think he was 5'5". But when he spoke, his accent, emotion showed. His accents got deeper and deeper. And after it was all over, and he cried at this session. He cried. Dubinsky could cry for the whole world. He could kill an individual, but cry for the whole world. And after it was over, my members came, and they said, oh, what a wonderful man, Dubinsky, what a wonderful speech. We said, we don't know what he said, but boy, the way he said it. But they were so impressed that this guy came down, and that's how we retired our first people. I think it was a telling time, and I think things opened up. And I think Atlanta was salvaged from the Wallaces standing in the doorway and the lynchings and the mobs. As a matter of fact, I was on a committee called OASIS, Organizations to Assist Schools in September.
Really? Tell me about this.
Yeah, it was a group of community people. I don't want to say leaders, but teachers and business people and labor people. And I was on that committee representing the ILG. And I'd go to meetings and talk about plans and how to avoid the unpleasantness of other cities and other states, and like Little Rock and so on. And plans were laid, by a good many people on getting the message across that it ain't going to work this way. It ain't going to work here in Atlanta like it did in Little Rock or places like that. And it went over very quietly here in the city. But interestingly enough, CBS television news picked up one of our meetings, and they photographed it, and they played it on national news on TV. And And I was going down to Mississippi that week. And I said, oh, God, my members are going to, how they're going to take it. And I was amazed because they said, oh, Nick, we saw you on TV. But that was the extent of it. They said they were kind of proud that they knew somebody on national TV, but the contents of it didn't ever take a...
Right, you, Dean Martin.
Well, whatever. No, but the contents was not discussed. It was just we saw you on TV, But those days were very interesting and very hairy. I've skipped over some parts of when I served time in jail.
Oh, wait a minute, we got to go back to that then. Everyone wants to know the time you served.
It's 1 o'clock.
Well, you know what? September 22nd, 1995. Tell me about your stretching the joint while you were an organizer.
Well, there was several arrests. My arrest record is considerable, as a matter of fact, because organizing in the Carolinas, I was in sort of charge of the organizing for the ILG from 1953, 52, late 52, 53, 54, 55. And we did some good organizing. When I first went to the Carolinas, we had 2 locals with several hundred members. And when I left, we had 2,000 members with about 6 locals, and growing.
Okay.
But it took a great deal of strike activity, and then when you have a strike activity, there's always an arrest. I think I told you about the mayor's police chief in Walterboro sat down and would come and walk me almost every week, or ride me every week to the mayor's office and tell me to get out of town. But in some towns it got even rougher than that. In Greensboro, North Carolina, we had a strike that lasted a year and a half. We didn't organize the place. It was in conjunction with a strike in New York and New Jersey of a children's wear firm in Appomattox, Virginia. And I was arrested there for assaulting a female. Fortunately, the police captain who was on the scene testified in my behalf.
Well, that always helps.
I could have been sent away for a couple of years.
Yeah.
The girl accosted me it was a cold February morning, and accosted me on the picket line. I was walking the picket line and grabbed my coat, and I didn't know whether she had a scissor in her hand or what have you, and I just pulled her by the coat sleeve. I didn't touch her really, her sleeve, to get her away from me, and the captain came over and said, go on into work, you have no right touching this man, he can't touch you, you can't touch him. And then when I found what she was sticking in my coat was a Valentine card. It was just about Valentine's Day. And it said, I'm on strike for love, and this was supposed to be a big joke. And I showed the captain the card, and then threw it away. About a week later, he called me at the hotel. And he said, Nick, will you come around the corner? It was the old Henry Hotel in Greensboro. And the police station was right behind it. And he said, I got to arrest you. He said, I don't want to embarrass you by sending a couple of detectives into the hotel. And I said, you're kidding. Is there a police dance, a ball or something? You want tickets? And he said, no, I'm serious. Come on around the corner. And I did. And they printed me and mugged me. And I said, well, what's the charge? He said, molesting, assaulting a female, which is a felony. It's an offense. But fortunately, he testified for me. I got legal representation, local attorney there. And his presentation was an honest one, and I was lucky that I was found not guilty. But later on, they stirred something else up, and I was found guilty of disorderly conduct in Greensboro. In Spartanburg, South Carolina, had a strike that lasted about 4 months, almost 6 months. I had just been married, maybe 5, 6 months. This is 1956. And we had a headquarters across from the plant that we were striking. And I came back to Atlanta with my wife to get an apartment because we were like gypsies for that 6 months. And we were going back in, we came back into Spartanburg, and I was walking up to the headquarters. The police captain came in right with a couple of detectives right in behind me, and I knew the guy. We talked many a time. And he said, "Up with your hands," and he frisked me. And my wife looked at me, and she said, "He's kidding." I said, "No, he's not kidding." And I said, "What's the charge?" He says, "Peeping Tom." Well, I never went to trial on it, but it hit the newspaper. And not only was I arrested, but there was another fellow, another union officer, and a picket, a woman. The theory was that we supposedly, immediately you get the picture of looking in somebody's bedroom or bathroom or something. No, that wasn't the charge. It was peering at a loading dock to get names and addresses of customers that they were shipping. But you see, that was the nonsense. I mean, but you got the headline: union officers arrested for peeping Tom. I mean, and right away you get. Well, it never came to trial. They kept postponing the probable cause hearing, postponing it, and then it died a natural death. But there's still an arrest for peeping Tom in Spartanburg. So whenever I would meet with that local, which is no longer there, unfortunately, a very large local, I'd remind them of the peeping Tom charges, but everybody knew what it was all about. But in Asheville, North Carolina, I had a strike situation. I wasn't so lucky. I was arrested for violating the terms of an injunction, supposedly. And we were enjoined to so many people at the gate, 4 people or something, at the door, picketing. And I was in charge of the strike, so I would have to go down and talk to the head deputy of Buncombe County, and we would exchange ideas of something was wrong, straighten it out. And technically speaking, I guess I was one extra picket or striker, and so for that reason, the judge gave me 30 days. He also gave another organizer 30 days, and he gave one of the strikers 30 days, but it was a striker who had become a pimp for the company. But he thought that pimp was me, so he was giving me 2 30-day sentences. The judge was really confused. But it was a fix-up job. It was a made-up company job. And I did serve 19 of those days in the Buncombe County Jail. It probably was a very informative, interesting time, because they put me in what was maximum security for 7 days. I was in with the creme de la creme of the criminal society, rape, child molester, bank robbers, attempted murderers, And it was a very interesting 6 days, 7 days, because I got a chance to look at another side of life, which I don't want to ever look at again. But I found that I could get along with them. When they were in there, they were different kind of people. My best buddy was a bank robber from Seneca, South Carolina. They would lock us up after a certain hour, 6 o'clock, or after dinner, or whatever they get, the slop they get. And because he could buy his way out, his cell was left open so he could go up and down the cell block. And he would get the hot water for us. I would never eat a Three Musketeer candy again. I don't know if you know what they are. They're like Milky Ways. Because he would get down and get the hot water, and we would have those candies and break it and make hot chocolate out of it. But he's the guy that would do it. Or if you got sick, he was the guy that could call the turnkey to get help or something. And also had a very seamy kind, I don't know, which I don't want to get in. But I got along with him because he said, good. Privately, we had conversations. He was a bank robber. He was a habitual bank robber. His father was a very rich construction man. His brother was a preacher. And I would tell him, you need psychological help. And he'd sit on the other side of the bar from me, and we'd talk. And he said, I know all about you. I've been reading about you in the newspaper. And you're the only innocent guy in this damn jail. and he had an ulterior motive, too. He told me how he was caught, why he was caught. He spent some years in Columbia, South Carolina. He was a very interesting guy. Of course, I lost track of him once I got out. But after that, they put me in with the hobos, the drunks, who were very decent guys when they were sober. They taught me how to play double-hand pinochle, double-deck pinochle. We had one guy that charged up the hill with Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan. And it was very interesting. I used to read letters because some of them couldn't read, and they would get love letters from the lady part of the and I learned the ladies' jail, and I learned all about Green Lizard. Green Lizard was a hair dressing or something sold at Kresge's in those days, and it was, I don't know, 30-40% alcohol. And when I first heard these fellows say, as soon as I get out of here, I'm going to go for Green Lizard. And I said, what the hell is Green Lizard? And they said, well, it was the alcohol content. They'd get drunk on this hairdresser, whatever. They were very interesting days in that jail. I got a chance to read. But I got out in 19 days for good behavior or something.
He busted out of the big house.
Yeah, I busted out.
Wow.
It really, you know, if you, I don't know how these fellows do life, I'll be honest with you. But it was part of the company and the community in league with the legal setup to beat the union. And when I did get out, it was amazing. I stayed one night in the hotel there in Asheville. While I was in, the contract was negotiated, and the next day after getting out, I went to the plant and walked through the plant. I think the employer thought I was going to punch him in the nose. I felt like it, but I didn't, because they had negotiated a contract. And Babinski called for me to go up to New York. I was not married. I was just about to be married. This was October of '55. I remember it quite well. And I got married in January of '56. So that the night before I went to jail, I called my wife, my fiance, it wasn't my wife yet, and I was supposed to go to New York to prepare for the wedding and the reception and so on. We got married in New York. And I told her I wasn't coming, or I couldn't make that day, that I have to postpone it. She said, "Why, you in cold feet?" I said, "No, I'm going to jail." I don't think she wanted to believe me. But
That's the best excuse I've ever heard.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that last night, before going in, they were looking for me, and they were by my hotel, and we got the word, my attorney got the word. I had to change attorneys because there was an attorney by the name of George Pennell, I'll never forget, and he sold me down the river because he said, just get out of the county, they can't come and get you. And you know, as long as you don't come into the county, it won't stick. And I said, no, I can't do that. So we paid $5,000 fine, which was a lot of money in those days, and I got 30 days on top, supposedly, for the violation of the court order, the injunction. Dubinsky called me, and he said, come up to see me, and I did, and we had a conversation, and I told him about my experiences. And he asked me, why didn't you leave? And I said, well, I would have left the union would have down the drain, and they negotiated a contract for it. So when I came out, his secretary, Hannah Haskell, said, well, what'd you get? What'd you get? I said, nothing. You know, he said, why did you? We chatted about my experience. He was interested in it. And the payoff came at the convention in 1956. He made a big fuss about it from the podium, and he made it sound as though the police took me from the church and put me in jail. I was about to get married. He made a big fuss. That was his payoff at the convention.
It's nice, though.
Huh?
That's nice, even if it does kind of create the vision of you being torn from the altar. It's a nice thing to do.
Yeah. But, it was interesting, but it was also dangerous. We had many close calls in those years. As I said before, the sled people were in South Carolina, where Jimmy Burns' hatchet men. And North Carolina wasn't too much better. It was difficult in Carolina. But then I, in 1950, December of '55, I came to Atlanta to become assistant regional director, and got married in January of '56.
Did you miss the organizing? Did you miss organizing?
Well, I never stopped doing it. So, I'm an organizer all the time.
Yeah.
Even now. I mean, you know, I go to meetings, organizing meetings, make pictures, speeches, and stuff like that.
Well, you know, I've been talking to a lot of people whose marriages fell apart under the strain of it. What held yours together?
Well, that's a good, maybe that's my wife. That's a good question. Maybe it's better, absence makes the heart grow fonder. Well, the children held us together. I may not have told you, but we have 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. My first 3 children were chosen children. We took them into our lives as infants. And then after 16 years of marriage, my wife got pregnant. And so we had another little boy, who's now 23, but my oldest is 34. Well, the kids helped us stay together, I guess. Because in the absence of a husband, at least she had children. But I think it affects different people in different ways. But we were able to make it go.
Do you think an organizer has particular qualities?
He's got to like people, and he's got to be likable. He's got to be able to get across. I was in Mississippi in 1951, and I hardly I think when we started this conversation, I hardly understood what they said, but I think I got across the idea that I like them as human beings, as workers, and I was there to help them, or try to help them, anyway. And if you can get that across to people, I think it works. You can't be a pompous ass, or an egotist, or at least I don't think so. You got to be pretty human and get across your humanity to people. And get the idea across that you really like them, which you can't fake that. Yeah. You really can't fake that. And if you don't like people, this is not the game to be in.
Did you have anybody not liking you because you were a Yankee or Italian?
If they start that way, but once you got through that, past that, I never. Oh, some people said change your name and this, that, and the other. Well, I had 3 strikes against me. I'm Roman Catholic and Italian, and still have the Yankee accent after all these years. But I think I overcame all of those obstacles, if you want to call them that. No, I don't. I think if you're basically decent towards people, they're going to react in kind, and it doesn't make any difference what you are. I don't think so.
Well, now, okay, so
unless you wear those differences on your sleeve.
Yeah.
If I went around saying, hey, I'm an Italian, Roman Catholic, Yankee, and I'm better than you, well, then you're going to get a reaction to that. If you say, look, that's what I am, and you accept me as I am, but I'm a decent guy. I had this kind of reaction. Oh, yes, I know. My cousin's uncle married a Catholic. Well, okay, but look, I don't have a eye in the middle of my head, nor you want to feel my tailbone, it doesn't stick out. Anyway.
When you got to Atlanta, then why don't you tell the audience what you did?
Well, I became assistant. I was asked to come in as assistant director, which I had refused one time because I was doing so well, I thought, in the Carolinas. But I came in and I was assistant director here for about 10 years. Okay. With a guy by the name of Al Kera. Yeah. Towards the end, Kera and I had disagreements, or not towards the end, we had our disagreements. But we survived each other, and then he resigned in about 66, 65, 66. I went to work for the AFL-CIO. I don't necessarily want to get into that period of, but they brought in a new director from Pennsylvania, and I worked for him, with him, for him, for about a year and a half. And then I was suspended because we couldn't get along. He was fiscally irresponsible. I thought, in my estimation.
What a tactful way to put it.
Waste. I'm not talking about thievery. I'm not talking about waste. And judgments. He was totally, in my estimation, totally unprepared for the job. As a manager of a local in Pennsylvania, to give him a job like this region was, I thought he was totally unprepared. I tried to help him. I did not. But then the president changed. Dubinsky now was Stolberg. There were other elements politically, changes going on in New York, and he was on one side, and I guess I was on the other. I didn't know it. And he suspended me. This was a blow. I thought it was maybe the end of my career in the ILG. And I called the then President Stolberg, and he said, "Come on up and see me, Nick. I want to talk to you." He said, "I didn't think you would do that. There must have been conversations in New York." And I said, "I really don't understand it. There's no charges. There's no this. I've been around for a number of years as an assistant director." And he said, "Well, if he can't use you, you work for me." He said, "I'm setting up a new organizing department called COD, Central Organizing Department. And I want you as the associate director. You could be the out-of-town guy. There's a New York guy, Douglas Levin, and I want you to work together. Your office will be in New York." I said, "Well, hey, wait a minute. I've got a house and 3 kids at that point, and a wife down in Atlanta." I said, "Well, you commute. You're going to be traveling the whole country, just about a year or so." Well, I did. I did it for 4 years almost. And
these directors don't have much of a sense of time, do they?
No. Because then when he called me into Atlantic City, well, actually I commuted to New York for about 3.5 years, going up, on Monday early and coming home on Friday, but sometimes not coming home on Friday. And but when I came home, I gave up golf or tennis or anything. I just had to be a father for 48 hours.
You probably get more attention that way,
Right. And my wife has to have, you got to ask her. She deserves all the credit in the world for being able to raise those kids practically as a single parent, excepting for a weekend visit. As a matter of fact, my daughter, who I'm very close with now, that's the young lady that's a public defender for DeKalb County. She was like a year and a half, 2 years old, and I was the enemy because when I came home, she'd be bumped out of the bed and back to the crib. And by the time we got to be friendly, I was leaving again. And later on, she told me it took her a long time to accept me as part of the family when I came back. But we survived as a unit, and about 6 months before coming back to Atlanta, he called me up, said, "Come see me in Atlantic City." There was the AFL-CIO convention.
Stolberg did.
Yeah. This was 69 now. And he said, "Well, how you doing in Baltimore?" Because he had sent me to Baltimore. The vice president was sick, Angela Bombay's. And I had become associate director of what we call the Upper South Department. I was no longer in COD. I did that for 3.5 years. And when I reported right to the president. There was no in-between guys. We worked directly with him for 3.5 years. And then he called me and said, "Angela needs help. Go to Baltimore and work down there." And I said, "Fine." The next Monday I went down there. And I did that for 6 months. And then he called me into Atlantic City to meet with him. He said, "How you doing in Baltimore?" I said, "Love it. I mean, I get along with her great. She's a great gal. She was in her 70s. She had colon problems. And about 4 or 5 weeks after I got there, she had a serious operation, colostomy and stuff like that. And she came out, and it was a love affair, I don't mean a love affair, but I'm talking about a relationship was good. And I took my family up there, looked for a house, to move them. And Louis says, "You are happy?" And I said, "Yeah, but I got to move my family now." I said, "That's enough." He said, "Well, how long has it been? It's been, what?" I said, "Almost 4 years." "What?" It seemed like a yes. To you, not to me. Ask my wife, what it seemed like. And then the conversation rolled around, and you want to know if I'd go to California and become the director out there. And I said, if you want me to do that, do it. But I got to move my family. I'll go out to the West Coast. If you want me to, I'll move my family. And so, but then he said, well, what about Atlanta? I said, is it open? He said, no. I said, then I want to talk about it. It's not open. And if you're asking me which one, if that's not open, Baltimore's more experience, closer to the one I had all these years in a southern type of experience. But I'll go anywhere, but it's got to be with my family. No, then we're using, what if Atlanta opens up? I said, well, if Atlanta opens up, and you want to play that kind of game, sure, I'll do it my way, because I've had the experience on it. And I know where the roads are, and the people are, and so on. And he said, well, I think I got my answer. I'll see you in October. This was September. October, there was a big reception in Washington, and he had, at that AVLCO convention, been elected to the executive board, had taken Dubinsky's place in the executive board. And so there was a reception at a meeting in which we had a staff meeting and so on and so forth. And he just waggled his finger across a crowded room like the South Pacific. And I went over and I said, Lou, congratulations, Mr. President. I'd call him Lou privately. Mr. President, I said, congratulations on your election. We hadn't talked. And he said, well, Nick, he said, I've been meaning to talk to you. What's today? Thursday. Next Tuesday, I want you to go to Atlanta and take that office over. I said, oh, I'd been hearing that the director had resigned under pressure. He was told that he couldn't do the job because he had problems, and that he was offered another job away from the region, back in Pennsylvania, under supervision. He would start a million things and never finish anything, and he refused. He's still around. I don't want to mention names. People know, but it makes no difference. Names make no difference. Because there's one of the things that Stolberg said to me was, "Could you work with this guy?" And I said, "Nah, he couldn't work with me. How can I work with him? It would be different." So what about his assistant? I said, "No, his assistant too smart for me. He's too smart for him. He's taking him for a ride." I kept up, I had friends in the region. And they would complain, talk to me about it. I didn't want to hear about it. I knew about it. And he said, well, okay, I think I got my answer. And across this crowded room, he called me and said, go take this office over. Well, I'll be honest with you, the first 3 months back were horrendous. Every drawer that I opened, another problem dropped out. Contracts weren't written, notes. Whether I had a killer newspaper edition, which I read, and it was a horrendous thing. It was really bad. But it was worthwhile. So people would say, gee, Nick, I understand it was what a terrible thing to have to go in like that. And I said, hell no, that's easy. Because if he was doing a good job, it would be difficult for me to do better. But he was doing such a terrible job that it was easy to do better. And there's the same amount of truth to that. You find people send me into a lousy situation, so at least I could look good, maybe. If I look bad, I'd say, well, the other guy couldn't do it, I can't do it. But we got to grow, and that was October of '69, and of course I've been director ever since. We made great. It was a great time, and
very dramatic time.
Yeah, it was very profitable for the union. I mean, we grew. The members got good contracts. Industry was moving down here. Good companies. Jonathan Logan, Bobby Brooks, Country Miss, knitting mills. We had associated with the garment. Back Logan had a mill in Spartanburg. Leslie Fay had a mill in Lincolnton. Membership kept growing. I was growing so fast I had trouble servicing correctly. But we did it. We took people out of the shops. I found that my best staff people came out of the shops.
Why?
Because they understood the business. And especially chairladies. Lillian Grubmeyer, she's a vice president, also southeast here, and a Tennessee state director. She was a chairlady, she was a young girl when I first met her over in Jackson, Tennessee. Almost all my staff, the better part of them were out of the shops. And that's not saying you can't do it unless you come out of the shop, but
It helps.
I found, yeah, it helps. The shop experience helps. You know what it means to fight over a piece rate, or not get it, or get it. How to handle a grievance. You don't have to send them to school. They've done it.
What people think is important.
Yeah, I think so. And so that's how I staffed most of my staff. I mean, 80% of my staff came out of the shops.
While you were doing this, were you getting involved in politics too?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Why don't you tell me about
Yeah.
that?
Well, actually, before I came back as director, when I was assistant director, I got involved with the Carl Sanders campaign here. When he ran against the woolhat from South Georgia, I can't think of his
Hamish?
name. No, another guy.
Oh, well, okay.
Whatever. But actually, the official labor movement, the AFL, backed the segregationists. And I joined a group of steelworkers, ILG, and a few others, who backed a guy by the name of Carl Sanders, young, who didn't talk about race. He talked about schools and roads and doing a better job for the state of Georgia. And he won. And I'll never forget, because they were cautious. Sanders was cautious. But he said his attorney, there was an attorney by the name of Richardson who handled his stuff. He said, well, you couldn't get a hotel to have a mixed meeting. I said, well, the only kind of meetings we have with our locals is open. There's no segregation. We never had a segregated local in the South, the ILGW, never. And I said, well, when you come to the Union Hall, was it 187.5 Trinity? He said, yeah, we'll do that. And I said, it's not segregated. Our Union Hall is open to all of our members. And he came. Sanders came. And I remember having a podium, which was there, and a Union label banner hanging. And somebody took that picture. They took a picture. And after his election, it appeared in the Chamber of Commerce publication. And it was proof positive that Carl Sanders was dictated to by the unions, which was nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean,
Don't you wish?
Yeah, right. But they really gave him a hard time over that picture. And I don't know where the heck that picture is today. It should be in the archives. But yeah, we stayed active and fought people like Lester Maddox and so on. and people like Minimum Jim Smith. He was a congressman here years ago, and his belief about minimum wage, because we call him Minimum Jim, was that there should be no minimum wage. Man should be able to work, get what he deserves, whether it's 10 cents an hour or $100 an hour. And so I remember one time we did a number on him. It used to be at what called the Ansley Hotel. It was a Dinkler Plaza or Ansley Hotel. It was one of the considered fancy downtown hotels. And he was speaking at an eggs and breakfast, eggs and issues meeting at the chamber or something. And we picketed him. And we got one of our big hulking organizers and put an ape costume on him and said that he was a throwback. Minimum Jim. Oh, Jesus. It made the newspaper. We hit him with the name Minimum Jim. And it kind of stuck. It got to be a popular name for a while. But we had rough times, and we supported people like Dwight Schmaler.
Is he one of the good guys?
Oh, yeah. Dwight was a good congressman. So was, considering everything, a good senator. Better than Talmadge and Russell. I'm not talking about labor issues. Whites would come to regional conferences. As a matter of fact, I think I was the first one. I made a mistake, purposeful mistake, and I introduced him as Senator White Schmaler, thinking ahead a little bit, and he became the senator. But he forgot where he came from. He ran a lousy campaign. But he was a good congressman. He was 100%, 95%. And of course, Andy Young, we worked with Andy. And what I consider the best one of them all is John Lewis right now. He's really a friend. And he knows that he had only one true friend in this area, in the 5th Congressional District, and that was the labor movement. Julian Bond, Andy Young, all of them knifed him. They went to Washington and they told our people, don't waste your money on John Lewis. And John knows that. He still remembers that. He didn't forget from whence we came. And the other boys, because they were trying to elect Julian Bond, and which, he might have made a good congressman, but I don't think he made half as good a congressman as John Lewis.
Yeah, I won a lot of money on that election.
Did you?
Yeah.
And the other congressperson that I think would be a crime is Cynthia McKinney. She has what they call Batesum for a young lady.
What is that? Oh, right, never mind, I know what it means.
She has intestinal fortitude.
There you go, okay.
Because I took an employer up there to talk to her about the health care bill when there was a health care bill a couple of years ago. But I also told this employer that this young lady, this young congressperson, had voted against NAFTA. And she told us a story about how Clinton, the president, had private little tete-a-tetes with small groups of Democratic congressmen and women. And she was in one of those groups. And of course she had declared against NAFTA, which I think was a smart thing to do. I think Clinton was not wise in picking up Bush's dirty linen and passing it as calling it NAFTA. But after the breakfast or lunch, whatever it was, he called her in privately to the Oval Office and gave her 20 minutes of arm twisting. And at the end of it said, well, of course now, Cynthia, you're going to, and promises, whatever, I don't know what it, he said, of course, Cynthia, now you're going to vote, give me your vote. And she said, prettily and sweetly, no, Mr. President. He said, well, his face was just stony, he was looking at him. But as she and her aide left, her administrative assistant was with her, she understands there was quite loud hollering coming out of people. She was telling this employee the story, and he was quite impressed. But subsequently, in an amalgamated meeting, she came to speak. I happened to be there. I was sitting on the dais, and she sat next to me, and she said, what shall I say? I said, tell him the story about the president. They'll enjoy that. She's quite a gal.
She's a pistol.
Yeah, she's okay, I think. Unfortunately, they're playing politics with the district.
And we might lose Newt on that too, though, so you've got to look at the bright side.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know. Newt could have been had. The people that, powers that be, when he was running in the Eastern Airline District strikes down that way. But now he's in Dunwoody, hell,
Yeah.
it's a good shape.
It's too bad. How are you fixed for time?
Oh, I don't know.
You okay? Okay. Let me ask you. Yeah, go ahead. Around this time, the civil rights movement, actually the civil rights movement was changing by '69, but there was still some chugging along on it. Generally, how would you say the ILG and the civil rights movement got along?
I think I told you all along, even as an assistant director prior to '69, I participated in groups and activities to foster integration, to eliminate segregation. And we did it outside the shop and inside the shop, because in some of the areas where we operated, there were segregated shops. And if oppressors in the shop were black, they were all black. Rooms were segregated. The water taps were segregated. And little by little, we got South Carolina, Georgia, and we worked, as I say, inside and outside the shop. I participated in a group called Oasis. I think I mentioned it here in Atlanta, and we worked with Martin Luther King. We worked with all kinds of people, groups. The labor movement was, as I said, we never had a segregated local. And all of our meetings were open. It created problems for us, but it solved more than it created.
What do you mean by that?
The workers looked at each other as workers rather than as white or black. And they reached out to each other. Now, what they did socially after work or after the union meeting was beyond our purview, but at least it was a beginning. When we had a strike headquarter in Walterboro or Spartanburg that was completely open to whites, blacks, Indians, whatever, because we had, in North Carolina, we had Indian members. We have, yeah. There was never offices, elections. I had locals in Florida, for instance, Sanford, Florida. One of my best staff members became a gal by the name of Dorothy Brown. She happened to be Afro-American, what's now called Afro-American. But she was the president and chairlady of a white local. Eventually I put her on staff. She just retired. But I put her on staff because she could work with anybody. I have black business agents or Afro-American taking care of shops that have majority white employees. So and vice versa. I mean, so that's, as far as civil rights is concerned, the ILG was always 2 steps ahead of everybody else. And I think I said before that one of the reasons I think Atlanta is what it is today is because it had a mayor called Hartsfield who was 2 steps ahead of the rest of the South on that issue and many others.
We've seen a bunch of mayors. Hartsfield, Young, Jackson. Well, who else was mayor? Massell, I guess, was mayor for a while.
Ivan Allen.
Ivan Allen. How would you
Sam
rate
Massell.
Well, let me ask
Hartsfield was top of the list. Yeah. Ivan Allen was a businessman, man. Andy Young was good. Maynard was okay. He was good. I don't know, Campbell remains to be seen, but he's a good man, I think. Massell got crossed up because of a garbage strike. He took the wrong. Massell happened to be a nice fellow, but he's 5'5" or something like that, and there was a garbage strike. The city employees struck, I think, for a week or something like that, and he got on television, and he liked the way he looked. He looked like he was 6'4", and he made a lot of mistakes. I'm not saying he didn't make all the mistakes. He may have been goaded into some of them, but then he made the mistake of thinking that he was a hero in beating back a strike. So I think he probably could have been a good mayor, because I happened to be on a committee that went to see him. I had just come back to Atlanta, and when I was briefed on it by the people, I said, "Gee whiz, I think you guys, a fresh look. I just come to town, but what I hear from this guy, maybe he could be saved, but I think it was too late, or at least it was conflicting." This is. I was not in the rooms when these deals, but my understanding was that certain promises had been made to Massell by the union that was involved, and then the promises weren't kept, and so that started the ball rolling down. And then Massell saw himself on television, and he looked like a big guy, and I think he liked that image. I think he's a decent. He could have been a much better mayor than he was if it wasn't for that incident. And then, of course, he lost the election. Andy Young was, of course, a good mayor. Projected that international flavor. I knew Maynard very well because he was a labor board field man and had handled some of our cases. And then about the time I came back in '69, he went into partnership or took into his firm. He wasn't in that. He wasn't mayor, I don't know. But he took a young attorney that was working for the ILG into his firm. So, he knew about he knows about the ILG. He was a good man, I think, basically.
He got in trouble with the garbage workers, too, didn't he?
Yeah, he had problems. I think he was a little bit more, had a little more finesse than Sam did. Of course, Ivan Allen was a businessman's man. You know, brought the ball team in and Ted Turner and so on. But I think Atlanta's been lucky. It hasn't had, you know, really bad mayors. It's had some mediocre ones, but I still think that Hartsfield made it what it is today. He was ahead of his time.
I've heard a couple people say Hartsfield was good
Yeah.
for labor, good for business.
Yeah, no, he was ahead of his time. He saw the future in the airport. He saw no future in segregation. He read the Times correctly. And if you looked at him, you wouldn't think that he'd be that kind of guy. He looked like a, you know, somebody that might be prejudiced and might be backward, but he wasn't. He was decent. He was married to a youngish gal, I think his second wife or something like that. His first wife passed away. But that might have kept him thinking young.
Yeah, well, might have kept him cheery anyhow.
Yeah, right.
Bright look on the world. Tell me about Unite. I know it's jumping ahead, but tell me what happened with Unite.
Well, both of our unions have a storied tradition. And, both of our unions kind of go on parallel tracks. One in the men's field, ours in the ladies' field. Politically, we've always been pretty close. And their membership has been eroded as ours. Theirs a little bit less because in the textile end it hadn't been affected as much yet. And in the menswear, coats and suits, not yet, but it's getting there. We've been screaming for 25 years about imports. 30 years, maybe 35 years. And of course our membership's been eroded. The ILG side was more adept at husbanding its resources, our money. Dubinsky was a fantastic guy with a buck. We worked for him for nothing, you know, and he did too. I mean, you know, and the other thing is you got to figure we were scaled from the wages that our people made in the shops. We didn't have
much.
Yeah, right. Even the union people. I mean, so is that when I left the shop, I was making $175. When I came to work for Dubinsky, I made $60. And I had to be 1,000 miles from home. So you went to work for Dubinsky in the ILG not to make money. You went because you believed in something. You had a desire to do something for the garment workers. I don't think the Amalgamated had that kind of leadership. They always had a kind of a dual leadership. Even in their best days, before the textile merger, there was always a kind of a dualism to the leadership. Even like Schenkman, and he was the secretary-treasurer, but he was almost, he just passed away, Finley. Murray Finley was the president. Schenkman was the secretary-treasurer. But they almost had equal positions in power.
Did it work out clothing, textile, or
No,
right, left?
no, they were, no, well, no, they were, I don't know, it might have been right, left, but a little bit. With Jack on the left side of the thing and Finley on the right side. And they were both really out of the clothing end of the thing. Finley from Chicago, Shankman from New York, who was really an attorney. But there was a dualism, and they had managers of districts sitting in the same office, and when one picked up the phone, the other one did. Here in Atlanta, for instance, Bruce Rayner is executive vice president, but he was a vice president of the area for textile. But they also had a vice president in Knoxville for garments. Well, that guy quit and went to law school, became a lawyer, so they didn't, they eliminated that. So it's taken a long time for that merger to come to textile and amalgam. I hope it don't take as long for ours, but it'll take some time. It's fresh. It's new. It's only since July.
That's weird. You come up with a name. Jeez.
That you got to ask somebody else.
Right.
I thought maybe it should be something like International Garment and Textile Workers Union of the World or something. But somebody in some ivory tower.
Must have thought it was good PR or something.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they said. And United, Unite became the name. But what's in the name? It rose by any other name or whatever you're talking about. But it's fresh. It's too fresh for us. I think it came from necessity. Our resources and membership, and their membership.
Are you still dividing up directorships?
Well, yeah, I'm still the director of the ILG side, and Bruce is amalgamated side. What merged immediately was the top. Jay Mesa became president. He was the ILG. Arthur Lovey is secretary-treasurer. He's the amalgamated guy. And then two executive vice presidents, Bruce Rayner, who's also the director of the Southeast area, is executive vice president from the amalgamated side. And Edgar Romney is the executive vice president from the ILG side. And they get along fairly well, I think. There are some differences. There are some strains and stresses. And then the newspapers merged, and the research departments merged, and the legal departments merged, and the accounting and all the finances, not all the finances, which couldn't be all the finances. But we threw a lot of money into this merger, millions and millions of dollars. But there's some finances that will never merge. They can't merge. They can't merge. I say they can't, but maybe like a retirement fund.
Yeah.
The ILG retirement fund has 130,000 people getting benefits. It's almost $1 billion, 973 million. I'm on the committee as of the last report, and we're still underfunded, according to the actuaries. But those funds can't be merged legally. We have a death benefit fund of $200 million that can only be applied to ILG members because it's a separate fund that sits by itself. We have a drug program that is funded separate and apart from any of our general funds. So we have a staff retirement fund for the ILG that has to sit. Well, of course, the Amalgamated has some of these funds as well.
Yeah.
On their side, they have a retirement fund in the textile industry. I went to a meeting just the other night of $200 million. So these funds cannot legally be brought together. They cannot. They have different purposes, and so they're going to sit outside the pale of this merger. The other thing that was agreed to in the merger is that there would be a 6-year opt-out if either side decided that the marriage wasn't working, that the president of the AFL-CIO would be the arbitrator. And,
sort of like Egypt and Syria.
Yeah, well,
UIR doesn't work, well, what the heck?
Well, it's novel in its structure, but I happen to be on the committee, and it took a lot of meetings, because even though we're a great deal alike, we have a great deal of differences historically, and emotionally it's difficult. I mean, 45 years I've been saying ILGWU, and it's tough to get that out of your lexicon, to get it out of your system.
Well, the thing is, if you say unite, no one will know what you're talking about anyway. You guys will keep saying ILG.
Yeah, right. No, but it'll work. It'll work. It's going to take some doing by all of us, thems and us, and we. Some people find it more difficult to swallow than others. I may be one of those. But I know I get along very well with my counterpart, with Bruce. We have lunch periodically and talk about our problems.
Well, maybe after 6 years you'll just say, no, you know yourself.
Yeah, right. I won't be around 6 years from now. I don't know.
When are you going to retire?
You want me to really tell you?
Well, sure.
Probably in about a year.
Oh, come on, for real?
Wow. I'll be 69. I'm 68 now.
Yeah, it's enough already, huh?
Oh, well, I won't just disappear in the woodwork. I want to stay active. I still travel like but maybe it's time to let the younger guys do it. It used to be that they'd stay until they keeled over, but I don't want to be one of those. I want to be able to enjoy my retirement and stay active in politics and the labor movement. That's all I know. As a matter of fact, some people say, "What's your hobby?" Well, I used to play tennis until the accident. I can't play anymore, so actually my job is my hobby and my vocation and avocation.
Which actually brings me to the question of religion.
What's that?
It brings me to religion, which we had talked a little about last time. Do you feel that, let me put it this way, someone told me, of the people I've interviewed, that their church became their union, or their union became their church.
No.
Other people have said differently, that no, religion was a sustaining thing. How did religion fit into all of this for you?
Well, it just so happened the Catholic Church issues, edicts were about working men and labor organizations, and they're very good on that issue. On some other issues, they might not be as good. But as far as working men being able to organize into groups to defend or to better themselves, I think Catholic Church is right on target as far as I'm concerned. I hear them on race and civil rights. I go to church up in Sandy Springs, and they preach togetherness.
You've always been a lot better than the Baptist on that.
Brotherhood, And so, and I ushered a mass up there, 5:30 Mass on Saturday. You want to meet, you want to see me, you come to 5:30 Mass, I'll get your money. And we have black parishioners, so they come in, and there's just no problems.
So it works well in your life.
Now, when it comes to abortion issues, and so that's another matter.
Yeah.
And but as far as labor is concerned, no, my religion never interfered with by union work. And I never felt that doing my work ever made me less of a Catholic. I might disagree with the priest on certain things, but basically one had nothing to do with the other. As a matter of fact, I think as far as the Catholic position on labor unions, it supported what I could quote the church, and if someone said, but in this part of the world, there were very few Catholics that said, my church won't let me join. I mean, I did have that, for instance, in Walterboro. We had some born-again preachers who wanted, during the Walterboro strike, and I don't mind opening up my meetings with prayers or something. If they want, if it helps the membership wants that, fine. We have chaplains and all. But this preacher told his people that they were sinning if they were on strike. And they came to me. I was running that strike. And I said, well, I don't believe it. And here's other religions, and there's no sin to defend yourself. And they went back. They decided. They told their preacher to strike their names from the rolls. They weren't going to be. And he came running. And one day I gave him the opportunity to open a union meeting with prayer. And he told his supervisor, they could go ahead, they could strike. So it's, it's one of those things. I got to tell you something else. I had a very bad experience with some preachers here in Atlanta. When I first came in '69, we had an election. There was a brassiere company here, big brassiere company, had 1,000 people working on Piedmont Avenue. Not there anymore. I found the thing already in progress when I came in the campaign. It looked like a loser, but one of my assistant, I had two at that time, came and said, I think I can get, it was mostly Afro-Americans, I can get the preachers to come in and help you organize. And then, the idea was, I said, well, okay, let's try it, but I don't know that I want to have a religious connotation, but if these people work and go to their churches, maybe a Sunday sermon might help or something. And there was supposed to be 5 of them come to meet with me at the office, the one on Plaster Avenue. And only 4 showed up. And so after we got through with the pleasantries, he said, well, it'd take $5,000. So wait a minute. My union, we watch our money very closely. What's the $5,000? Well, there was going to be 5 of us here, $1,000 for each church. I said, well, what's the church? I mean, how, donation or what? No. For us, we have expenses. And, I said, no, wait a minute. Oh, I said, I don't. That doesn't sound right to me. What's the union going to get from this campaign? Well, we'll come, we'll help, Steve Levin will make a speech and sermon and so on. And I said, well, wait a minute now. I'll tell you. I'll spend $10,000. You give me young people with cars that are going to do house visiting, and we'll pay them a salary to let they could do a job. We give them a salary and expenses, gasoline, and no. Well, they wanted a caucus. And I went back to my office because it was my assistant at that time. They were in his office. I was skeptical to begin with. Then we got back together after a short period of time. And they said, okay, 4,000. In other words, screw the guy that didn't show. And then I knew what I had, you know. And I said, well, fellas, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give each one of your churches $100. Well, we have to go back to our elders.
Yeah.
I never heard from them. P.S. We lost the election. P.P.S. We wouldn't have won it with them.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I must say this: that Coretta Scott King has been, over the years, was good with us. We'd get word to her about an election or something, and she'd send a letter out for the workers. Yeah. They hadn't done it recently, I mean, yeah. But earlier on,
She's got family problems now.
yeah, sure, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
She would cooperate, send a letter and say, my husband, you know, and try to affect the outcome of an election in our favor. How effective it was, depending on where it was, depending on what the experiences were. We've been helped by some civil rights leaders, and we've been hurt by some, depending on where it was and what the situation was. But, you know, no one thing makes a successful organizing campaign. And no campaign is successful unless the people themselves want to help themselves. So that if it ain't ready, it ain't ready. And sometimes when it is ready, the lawyers and the slick artists that are doing the job on America politically will do the job on the workers in the shop. Because they cloud the issues, they get them all confused. And it's not a question of whether it's right or wrong anymore, it's a question of fear, it's a question of will I be able to pay the bills, and will this company move out, will it close down? And then where will I be? So that's today's America and today's problem as far as organizing is concerned. And yet it wasn't easy in the old days. I mean, when you went into a town, you didn't only fight the employer you fought all the community, the employers of that community. Years ago, I went into a town called Johnson, South Carolina. There was a brassiere factory there, and the company was union in New York. And I went in to demand that this fellow, I'd been talking to Dubinsky, he was president, that, you know, he'd bring the conditions down to Johnson. So when I walked in, and no sooner than I walk in, here comes 5, 6 guys around us, and I sat down with the employer and the oil man, the dry goods guy, the pharmacist, the sheriff, you know. Why the hell don't you get out? And they're telling me in front of this guy. There was just enough chairs for them. After the meeting was over, I went back to Columbia. We had an office on Lady and Bull. I had a one-room office on Lady and Bull Street in Columbia, South Carolina. Bull Street happens to be also the street where used to be the state insane asylum. I said, I called Dubinsky up. I said, they followed me to the county line. They used to do that. They'd make sure you got out of their county. And I said, President Dubinsky, I think I was set up. And I told him the story. And I said, there was just enough chairs for these guys. How do they know? How come? In the waiting room of this plant. And their complaint was, hey, it's a big peach county, or was. I guess it still is. Peach center. They said, we pay our people 75 cents to pick up, and you guys pay 75 cents an hour. Are you coming in here and spoiling our game? You know, so it was bad enough that they have to pay 75 cents an hour. That's what they said. Because we don't pay them that much an hour to pick up peaches. I had the same thing in Bishopville, Lee County, South Carolina. Terrible. There it was. The community was so well organized. We went to give a leaflet out, and there was a wall of men to prevent us from giving the leaflets. Cops, businessmen, husbands.
Just sort of random husbands of the people who work there?
Oh, husbands, they brought them to work, and they stayed to protect them against us.
Well, hey, you were peeping Toms.
Yeah, well, but they didn't know that.
Yeah.
That was before I was a peeping Tom. But then they were going to have a meeting of all the workers in the Lee County Courthouse, public building. And I got wind of it. But then they also sent word to me, this guy, Ruskin, something like that. I'm sure he's gone to his just desserts. He sent word to me that I couldn't go to the meeting. And then I got word that I could go to the meeting. But I couldn't take the floor. I couldn't speak. And so it was a fellow named John. He's passed on now. So he was a student out of Dubinsky's Training Institute, matter of fact. He was traveling with me. I was the expert. I'd been around for 3 years. And so I said, let's go to the courthouse. They had all the workers. All the businessmen were in the jury box. And this attorney is excoriating my union movement. All kinds of bad things we were. And what do you want to do? Chase this company out of Lee County? Then he said, this was the crowning blow. And I sat here and John sat there, 1 seat apart so we could look at each other from behind. But we sat towards the back. But sure enough, 2 guys go sit behind us. One behind me, one behind him. I'm looking at his guy, he's looking at my guy. They were sheriffs. They had the badge and a gun. And this fancy attorney in town said, I understand we have some union men in the courthouse today. Would they like to say something?
Fuck.
And I'd been told you can't. So I get up and I said, yes, I'd like to say a few words. And then I went and told them how people working for a living like this were making more money under better conditions. And that we would like to bring those conditions to Bishopville. We had no purpose other than that. And that these people had a right under the law to organize into unions for their own benefit under the Wagner Act. Finally, he didn't make me talk too long. And he said, if you like the way you're living, you better leave Bishopville and Lee County. I mean, throw me out in public. want your head on your shoulders, get out now. It kind of broke the meeting up.
Yeah. That puts a damper on any discussion.
John and I got in the car. I mean, we kind of, and these two fellas are following us, get in the car. And they get, and we go back to Columbia. And they follow us all the way to the county line. I mean, I thought they were going to stop us, but we got back to Columbia. The next day, two or three guys come to the office in Columbia, and they were husbands. I didn't know who they were. And they said, "We're from Bishopville." I said, "Oh, geez, here we go." He said, "We want you to know something. It took a lot of guts to do what you did up there. And anytime you want to come to Lee County, here, call us. We'll ride shotgun for you." I said, "Okay, thanks a lot." I didn't want no damn shotgun. P.S. We organized that factory eventually, some years later. And it was a bad place, but they just, I think the lawyer had passed on or moved on or something. But they just, it's a mindset, especially in the smaller towns, with a mindset that these young ladies and young men, if you ever gave them a little bit of freedom and liberty and an idea, they're going to turn the status quo upside down, and they might take over. And that wasn't our purpose in life, but it was kind of a side issue that would come up, and we'd get involved in elections and so on and so forth. But they wanted to be big fish in a little pond, and they wanted no competition. So we had that happen to us quite a few times.
Suppose you had a room full of young men and ladies that you could get up on a podium and say what you wanted to for a couple minutes. What advice would you give them?
Yeah.
Labor advice.
If you're in it to make money, get out of it. Get off. If you have a desire to improve society, and if you are satisfied with psychic remuneration, then this is what you should be doing. If you like people, basically. If you think that the world would be a better place if people were treated decently, and if they made a living with the honest sweat of their brow and hands, and you could help them do that, and that's what you wanted to do, then Lakeland is the place to be. If you're looking for something easy to do, it ain't the place to be. If you're looking for something where you're going to get kudos and bonuses and recognition, forget about it. There's only one George Meany. There's only one Dubinsky. There's only one Kirkland, and he got the wrong kind of kudos at the end. But most of us that work and labor in the vineyards, as they say, do it without too much recognition, without too much money, without too much fuss, fanfare. My father was an officer of the ILG, and he never rose any higher than a business agent. He didn't live long enough to see me become a vice president. But that would have been, in his mind, the ultimate for me to be a vice president of the ILGW. He never dreamt in his own mind that he could be, but maybe he had a thought for me. But there are thousands of guys who've given blood, sweat, and tears to build this movement, this country, whose names will never be inscribed on walls or plaques or anything else. And it takes thousands, it's going to take thousands more to keep it alive and keep it going. If that's what they want to do, then this is the place to do it, and the movement to do it, to keep this country free, really free. Because what's happening now in Washington is a dictatorship of the worst kind. That when they say black, they mean white. When they say white, they mean gray or blue or something else. There were a time when I was in Bishopville, I was really afraid for America when this guy said to me, "If you like the way you're living, get out of town." I left saying to my buddy riding with me, John Riccardi was his name, handsome devil. He looked like Errol Flynn. Handsome devil. Got all the girls on him.
There's always one in the crowd.
And I said, "John, I'm afraid this country is ready for a Mussolini or a Hitler." And you know, I'm almost afraid of that now. When I see a phony like Newt Gingrich getting so far on lies and distortions of the truth, it's frightening. It absolutely is frightening. And if that's what these young people in this supposed audience that I have, if that's what they fear and are afraid of, the labor movement's the place to stop that kind of nonsense. So that's what I would say, and a hell of a lot more, probably.
Let me ask my Barbara Walters question, and we'll go eat.
Yeah.
Anything you do over again, for better or worse, or like to live over again?
Let me tell you what I said. The last board meeting of the ILGW, I'm the senior VP. I was the senior VP of the board, the GEB of the ILG. It turns out I'm the senior guy now on the Unite board. It only means that I lived longer. I got to be a vice president sooner than most of these other guys. I've been a vice president of the ILG since '71. Jay, the President Mazur, asked me, he said, "Nick, when I closed the meeting, he said, do you have any thoughts?" And I said, "Yeah, I guess so." I said, "It's been a hell of a ride, 45 years. It has its high moments and its low moments, its ups and its downs. But there's not a thing I would have done in any other way." And that's probably the same thing I'd say to you now.